Okay, imagine this. You're standing in your bathroom, right? Just doing something totally normal, like brushing your teeth, same old routine. And then you look up into the mirror. And the person looking back, well, it doesn't feel completely like you. Not the you remember anyway. Maybe their face looks thinner or the lines are, I don't know, sharper. Their eyes seem like older but also newer somehow. You know it's you, obviously. But there's this weird feeling like you don't quite belong to that reflection anymore. That really disorienting moment, that kind of self-discovery where your body changes faster than your sense of self. That's exactly what we're getting into today. We're looking at this really deep, often overlooked part of personal transformation, especially when people are losing weight using tools like semaglutide. So our mission here is to unpack why those emotional shifts, the identity changes, are just as important, maybe even more so than the physical ones. And to help us do that, we're diving into two key sources. First, the Dan Hollis Semaglutide Manifesto, which lays out this really human-first way of thinking about transformation. And second, a really powerful story from his Quiet Window field notes. It's called The Morning Her Reflection Didn't Recognize Her, and it just brings this whole idea to life.
Yeah, and it's striking how Hollis kicks things off. He says right up front in the manifesto, this is not a drug journey, it's a human one. Ooh. So semaglutide, it's framed as this powerful tool. It works on GLP-1 receptors, affects satiety, slows digestion, basically changes how your brain registers hunger and reward, which, okay, can feel incredibly freeing for a lot of folks. But Hollis is quick to point out it can also be, well, terrifying.
Terrifying. Why
Why?
terrifying?
Because it shifts your whole internal landscape almost automatically. You didn't necessarily will these changes in appetite perception in the same way you diet, right? And that's why his whole approach really hinges on needing support, education, and real human guidance. It's way more than just getting a prescription.
Right, that human guidance piece. It connects to something else, Hollis says, that really challenges a common belief about weight loss. You know, that thought, if I just tried harder, had more willpower, we've all been there. But Hollis just turns that on its head. He says pretty bluntly, willpower was never the problem. How does he explain that? What's the real challenge then?
Well, it's kind of a paradigm shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's basically saying, look, willpower alone often just can't win against deep-seated biological drives. Plus, you've got emotional responses, habit loops built up over years, maybe decades. They're often working against your conscious effort.
Ah, okay, so it's biology, habits.
And emotions.
Yeah.
Definitely emotions. Think about why people eat when they're not physically hungry. Anxiety, loneliness, boredom, stress. It becomes a coping mechanism. So if you use something like semaglutide and it dials down the physical hunger signals, great. But if you haven't addressed why you were eating emotionally,
Then there's a void.
exactly, a big vulnerable void. And that's why he stresses that emotional support is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, those old patterns can just creep back in. It's emotional weight as much as it is physical weight, as he puts it.
That makes so much sense. We get fixated on the scale, the numbers, but the internal world. That's where the real work is, it sounds like. And speaking of the long haul, what about the lure of quick results? I know Dan Hollis has some pretty strong opinions on the trap of losing weight too fast.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about this issue of metabolic pacing, or rather, the lack of it. If you lose weight extremely rapidly, your body can kind of freak out. It might slow down your overall metabolism to conserve energy. And, crucially, you tend to lose more muscle mass along with fat. Muscle is metabolically active, so losing it actually makes it harder to keep the weight off long term.
Ah, so slower can actually be better for sustainability.
Exactly. He advocates for timing things, nutrition, building new habits, monitoring progress in a way that lets your body adapt more smoothly. And this ties into maybe the biggest point in the manifesto. The real work begins after the medication.
After, not during.
Well, during too, of course, but the long-term work really kicks in afterwards. Semaglutide isn't meant to be forever for most people. So if you haven't built a solid plan for when you stop, those old hunger cues, the emotional triggers, the ingrained habits, they're likely going to resurface. You need new, sustainable habits that aren't dependent on the weekly injection.
Okay, so let's see how this all comes together for our real person. This is where we meet Adrienne in those quiet window notes. She's 53.
Right, and she'd had significant physical success with semaglutide. Weight was down, joints felt better, clothes fit, on paper. Everything was going great.
Yeah, a total success story. Until that one morning, the toothbrush moment we talked about, looking in the mirror and just not connecting with the woman she saw. She said her face was thinner, lines sharper, and her eyes. this is the part that gets me, somehow older and newer at the same time. Like she'd been peeled back and rearranged without being asked.
Wow, that's quite a description.
Isn't it? She knew it was her face, but she told Dan, I didn't feel like I belonged to her. It wasn't about missing the pounds. It was like her whole sense of self had kind of evaporated.
And this is where Hollis brings in that concept he calls identity lag.
Identity lag.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's not like a formal diagnosis or anything, but it captures this experience so well. His definition is basically, your body can change faster than your story, and when that happens, the soul gets confused.
the soul gets confused. That's powerful.
It is. And what's really interesting is when this crisis hits, it's usually not during the hard part of losing weight. It often happens after things stabilize physically. The constant hunger isn't there anymore. The old rituals around food start to fade. The physical body that maybe felt like armor that changes. And you're left standing there, potentially feeling, like he says, unrecognizable, even to yourself.
So Adrienne wasn't sad about the weight loss itself.
No, not at all.
Mm.
She was mourning, in a way, the version of herself who had carried them, the person who knew how to navigate the world in that body. Maybe she used humor in social settings or always wore certain clothes. She knew how to be that person. But now, that person was gone. And this new version felt like a stranger living in her skin.
Wow. So faced with this really deep internal disconnect, how did Hollis actually help her? What did he do?
Well, crucially, he didn't try to fix it immediately. He didn't jump in with, oh, but you look great, or anything like that.
Good. That probably would have felt dismissive.
Exactly. He just listened, really listened. And then he offered this insight. The weight loss is just the clearing. The becoming takes longer.
The clearing versus the becoming. I like that.
Yet it frames the physical change as just making space. The real transformation, the integration of this new self, that's a deeper, slower process. So they started this rewriting process together. Not rewriting her body, obviously, but rewriting her internal narrative, the meaning behind things.
How did they do that? What changed?
They worked on reframing concepts, like shame became memory. It happened, you acknowledge it, but it doesn't define you now. Or control became curiosity. Instead of trying to rigidly control everything, becoming curious about her new experiences, sensations, feelings. And discipline became alignment, moving away from forced discipline towards finding choices and actions that felt genuinely aligned with who she was becoming.
That sounds incredibly powerful, liberating even, but probably really difficult too. Was it a smooth process for Adrienne?
Oh, definitely not smooth. I mean, it's deep work, right?
Right.
But it was effective over time. Week by week, she started to, as Hollis puts it, fill her new frame. Not with the old stuff, the old anxieties, but with permission.
Permission. Permission for what?
Permission
Okay.
to not have it all figured out yet. Permission
Yeah.
to feel awkward sometimes in this new reality.
Yeah.
Permission to build a new story about herself without feeling like she had to totally reject or erase the old one.
That feels kinder, less pressure.
Totally. And the change wasn't sudden. The mirror itself didn't change, obviously. But as Hollis notes, the way she greeted it did.
Mm.
She stopped flinching away from her reflection. She wasn't necessarily smiling yet, but she could stand there longer. Just be present with herself. And for Dan, that ability to just hold her own gaze, to be with this new self without judgment, that was huge. That was something.
Yeah, that really is something. It brings us back full circle, doesn't it, to that core idea in the manifesto.
Exactly. The guiding principle, there is no shame here, only process.
And that just reframes the whole struggle, I think, for so many people dealing with weight and body image.
It's such a crucial message. It
Yeah.
says you're not flawed, you're not lazy, it's not a moral failing. You're dealing with complex biology, yes, but also with cultural pressures, emotional history, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why his approach is presented as a conversation, not a prescription. It's not just rules.
It's more like a map
Wow.
or a guide.
Yeah, map, a guide, and maybe a community too, something that acknowledges the whole human journey involved. And it all leads to this really hopeful final thought from him. You're not starting over, you're starting right.
Starting right. Not from a place of shame, but from a place of alignment and doing that deeper work.
Precisely. Beyond just the number on the scale.
Okay, so wrapping this up then. What we've really explored today is how true transformation, especially with something like weight loss aided by new tools, goes so much deeper than just the physical. It really involves this profound emotional recalibration, this reshaping of your identity. Tools like semaglutide might kickstart the process, they might do the clearing.
But they enable the start of that deeper work, the journey of self-discovery, of becoming.
So here's something to think about. If a major change in your physical self can trigger this identity lag, this need to sort of re-inhabit yourself, what about other big life shifts like starting a demanding new job or moving to a completely new city or even entering a significant new relationship? Might those also require a conscious effort to feel like you belong to yourself again within that new reality? And how can we give ourselves and maybe others the patience and the permission needed for that internal becoming process, whatever the trigger might be?